the drill. Rubber's comfortable. Yeah, perfect. And any loose wire, just stuff in your pocket or something.
How long do you want me to go?
So you have 15 minutes.
50?
What we'll do is, Brandon will give a time signal at 45.
Okay.
So we can kind of do a
Only
stop.
5 minutes for QA?
If you wanted, we can do a 40-minute stop.
Okay, I'll see how it goes.
Okay. We'll start at 40 minutes then, looking at a watch. You can decide how much more you can go. For Q&A.
Okay. Is there a clicker? Or is there a way to see the notes? Presenter tools. Show speaker. I always forget to how to do this. Yeah. All right, here we go.
You can just use your arrow keys then?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Camion. I'm the CEO and founder of Mind Alliance Systems, and today we'll talk about collaborative intelligence, which we believe is the next generation of knowledge management. Very briefly, we actually spent a decade focused on government clients before starting to shift to include non-profit organizations and professional services firms. And we provide a mix of strategy consulting, research services, software solutions, and we also do data analysis. Let me start by defining collaborative intelligence as the synergistic integration of machine and human capabilities into an increasingly effective and efficient socio-technical system. And I might use that jargon again during the presentation, socio-technical. And I believe it's a very important concept, and I'll explain why as we move ahead. One of the quotes I like to refer to is by Gary Kasparov, the chess champion, the grandmaster, who in a book review about chess metaphors points out that the combination of people, process, and technology beats any two of those three, hands down. And when it comes to knowledge management and collaborative intelligence as an approach that I believe knowledge managers like you should adopt, consider this idea of the people, the process, and the technology as the critical combo. I mentioned the term socio-technical environment or socio-technical system. It's really, of course, a system of systems. And the field of human-computer interaction is playing an increasingly important role in understanding the way people interact with not only the interface of the software on the screen in front of them, but with the information itself, and is beginning to, not beginning, for decades now, concepts like embodied cognition and situated cognition paint a picture of our thinking processes, even at the individual level, and certainly at the organizational level, as being more distributed than we may have realized until now. Many of us think that thinking happens inside our head, when in fact, thought processes are often dependent on physical objects in the environment and obviously social interactions and so forth. So I'm going to be mentioning concepts which you might later want to read up on because they will enrich your view of your practice of knowledge management. Since we're near DC, I thought that when it comes time to illustrating concepts about collaborative intelligence, I would use somewhat familiar business processes to paint the picture. So one of the business processes which I imagine you all, in one way, shape, or another, have some sense for is the intelligence cycle. Almost every federal government agency has some type of intelligence unit, even if it's not formally part of the intelligence community, certainly if it is. And so this cycle begins with typically the planning and direction based on the needs and requirements of a policymaker or an executive decision maker, continues through the collection, obviously the management of the collection of data and intelligence, the processing and exploitation of that data, analysis done, of course, by people using tools and to a degree automated, and then dissemination of intelligence products. So when we talk about examples of why the collaborative intelligence approach is important as a knowledge management leader, I'll be illustrating it with examples from this cycle. But if you're in the civilian arena, you may resonate more with the notion of a research service. Almost every organization has some function, or at least one function, that provides research as a service to other parts of the organization. How many people here work for an organization which can either relate to intelligence production or supporting some part of the organization with research? Show of hands. Just I want to make sure that, okay. So if any of you need examples from a different context, ask for them and I will try and translate what we're talking about to your context. Here, just to pause on this for a moment, who are the stakeholders in this ecosystem? And again, it varies from industry to industry, but so these, just think of these as generic types. You might have information professionals, we'll call them research analysts or librarians, knowledge professionals or knowledge workers that are using the research produced by the service providers, software providers who in a healthy enterprise are really partnered with you because they're shaping their products to suit your needs. So they're not just some email address that you contact for tech support. That's probably not a very critical stakeholder for you, but rather a vendor that needs to continuously update their solutions in light of your feedback. Clients or customers of your organization, and departments like marketing, business development, and data providers. You may subscribe to data providers or receive data from partners without paying for it. So what do you need to do as a KM leader in order to embody this idea of collaborative intelligence? Well, the first thing I believe you need to do is to think about your enterprise as a socio-technical system. There's that concept again. One where humans interact not only with other people, obviously, but with software. And not just with software, but with AI-enhanced software. The second activity, which I believe a KM leader needs to engage in, and of course lead the effort by the whole knowledge management organization and beyond to engage in, is understanding the business processes and decisions and tasks that need to be supported. All too often, we'll hear knowledge management leaders string together the often worn out phrase, we need to get the right information to the right people at the right time so they can make the right decision. Right? How many people have heard that? Now, have you ever heard a knowledge management director then say, and here's my list of the decisions in the organization that we need to support? All too often, they can't actually list the decisions that we're working so hard and spending so much money to support, which is a huge gap, and that needs to be, in many cases, the focus of the effort. Now, understanding the decisions that people make and the processes that, that those decisions are part of, and I can go on, and the tasks and activities that people engage in as part of those processes is itself something that cannot be accomplished without collaboration with people and without the help, I believe, of AI-enhanced software. We'll talk some more about that when we get to the next phase of this presentation, where I'll talk about the how, more about the how to do it. The third activity with regards to approaching KM through a collaborative intelligence orientation is finding ways to make the software smarter by harnessing human intelligence. We will talk about the limits of software, the limits of AI, and increasingly, as knowledge management professionals, you will either lead or be part of an effort to get people to provide inputs to make software smarter. For example, creating labeled training sets so that machine learning algorithms can be used to produce predictive models. If we don't know how to identify, for example, what that tumor looks like when it is cancerous, then the machine perhaps won't be able to discern that either. So why now? Why is collaborative intelligence a timely theme for knowledge managers? I've written a few ideas, but I'm very open to hear additional suggestions either now or at the end in the Q&A part. Well, obviously, the global economy is rapidly becoming knowledge-based. That's been going on a long time. I just came back from a trip to India, which was an incredible experience because you see 1 billion plus people who are very actively moving from a world where their work was about manual labor to a knowledge-based approach. And thank goodness for India, because it's going to boost the global economy significantly. Another reason collaborative intelligence is timely now is because most apps, applications, services are going to incorporate some AI. So if you're not part of this effort to figure out how humans and AI collaborate in order to deliver value, you're going to be left out of the economy. Another reason is, honestly, I don't think that as a KM director or practitioner, you can succeed very well anymore without a collaborative intelligence approach. I can provide more examples later, but I'll start with one now. The early days of knowledge management had some very painful failures when people were expected to do a lot of manual work adding metadata to documents before uploading them into repositories. And today, obviously people won't stand for that kind of tedium, and they expect software to do some of that automatically. So unless you're developing ways to automate what used to be manual aspects of knowledge management operations, you won't succeed. The fourth reason I believe collaborative intelligence is timely as a theme for KM is because of the complexity of our enterprises. Today, every single one of our organizations that matters has a very complex set of processes. Often the work is distributed around the country, if not around the world, at the very least among different offices. And it's very difficult to understand how such a complex enterprise functions without AI. At the most basic level, just think about expertise location. If you've got thousands of people in your company spread around the world and you need to find that expert who can inform work that you're doing, you can either spend hours searching with keywords, or preferably that profile is automatically suggested somewhere in the interface of the software you're using at the right time. So you don't have to waste time looking for it. There's a gig economy growing, and whether or not you buy into the notion that in the future more and more of us are going to be working on short-term projects that we find online, you all already know that the era of lifetime employment at one company is pretty much over. So with that change afoot, people leaving companies very frequently, not staying their entire careers, it becomes essential to capture institutional knowledge, more essential to capture institutional knowledge perhaps than ever before. And that is a key function of knowledge management teams, is to retain institutional knowledge. Okay, let's see if we can get the audio back. I mean the video back. Yes. And then the last reason I provide on this slide is that collaborative intelligence as a theme is key to accelerating information flow and enabling agility. We want the right information to get to the right person at the right time, as we said. Without the help of collaboration with people, which itself is helped with software powered by AI, and without the help of AI helping directly to match you to relevant information, information will not flow at the speeds that are required for competition at a global level. So, how do you do it? How do you create collaborative networks of people empowered by AI and smart processes? Let's talk about the various answers to that question through 5 windows. We'll start with people, and then we'll talk about process, data, technology, and governance. For each one of these, I'll talk about some challenges that you probably face or will face in your jobs. I will talk about some solutions that we have experienced, that we have gained experience with and recommend, and we'll start with people. So, a key challenge that I have encountered, that my team and I have encountered in multiple engagements, in government, in the private sector, in NGOs, is people thinking that KM is this. Whatever this is. KM is SharePoint. KM is collaboration. KM is communities of practice. They want to put it in a box and say, this is what it is. When in reality, there's no formula for KM that applies globally to every organization. You have to create the KM to suit your enterprise in its current state. And if we go to your enterprise and offer KM solutions at a maturity level you're not ready for, they won't stick. So there's a maturity level dimension to this. The other dimension is the interdisciplinarity. I would love to say that all of our clients were well read in all of these areas. And by the way, we might want to turn the lights off here because I believe it's probably hard to see this from the back. If you can, go ahead. It won't bother me. These disciplines all have important insights for you as KM directors now, or managers. Do you need to go and get a PhD in every one of these disciplines? No. Does it help to at least read the first few pages of the Wikipedia article? Absolutely. Absolutely. So I won't read these areas, and I may have left some off the list. Don't be offended if your bachelor's or master's degree or PhD is in an area that you believe is core to knowledge management but is missing. No offense was intended. The point here is just to communicate the fact that as KM directors engaged in trying to implement collaborative intelligence in your organization, you need to know a sufficient amount about computer science and about UX design so that you can be effective in your jobs, or at least know some of the right questions to ask so that more specialized people on your team can interact with you at a mature level. So some principles. Still, we're focused on the people dimension. Some principles that will help you are taking a holistic view of knowledge management, of the knowledge environment. Not just focusing myopically on, this interface or this piece of software as the silver bullet, thinking about the political dimensions, the social dimensions, the training and learning dimensions, and so forth. Another principle is integrate with other organizational functions. KM rarely has enough capacity to deliver effect on its own to thousands of people around the world in different offices. How many people here belong to a knowledge management organization where people have knowledge management titles, and there's more than 40 of you, 30 of you, 20, 10, 5, 2. Okay, so a lot of people didn't raise their hands. That means that in many cases, you're a solo knowledge management professional. That means you must know how to activate the other parts of your organization as force multipliers for what you're trying to do. Training, planning, certification, forming groups with the right experts from the different disciplines. Recognizing that KM is not easy to define and that its appropriate definition depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Continuous learning. As leaders or practitioners of KM, I hope you love to learn about ways to improve people's interaction with knowledge and with information. And so that's key. And then change management in leadership is a key principle of success. For knowledge management, of course, generally, for collaborative knowledge management, especially so. Because if you're trying to foster better collaboration with or without AI-powered technology, but especially with AI-powered technology in the mix, you are changing the way people work, by definition. How do you do that without ruffling feathers, without endangering people's job security concerns, triggering their job security concerns? That is not simple. Has to be part of your consideration. The next window we'll go looking through is process. Here, some of the key principles would be understanding the processes that you're trying to influence or support, the events that drive those or trigger those processes, and the associated roles, decisions, and business metrics. As I mentioned before, all too often we hear the knowledge management leader talk about right information, right people, right time, right decision. Can't list the decisions. Can't even list the processes. They don't have a controlled, defined list of the processes in their organizations which deserve attention. Another principle is developing a common vocabulary. Ideally, a controlled vocabulary for KM operations. You can play loosey-goosey with terminology up to a point, but if you have hundreds or dozens of processes, each with lots of different named IT systems that are used as part of those processes, typically hundreds, obviously different categories of employee roles, different categories of office locations or types or regions, a huge world of terminology with regards to your actual domain, right? Think about the terminology you need to be able to talk about and coherently slice and dice analytically if you're in science, like the National Science Foundation, or education, if you're in the Department of Education or Department of Defense, right? How can you manage knowledge about tanks or planes if you don't have consistent names for those things? The same applies to knowledge management. And I'd like to see knowledge managers start to develop taxonomies, something that we've done painstakingly, taxonomies of knowledge management problems, taxonomies of knowledge management solutions, taxonomies of knowledge management goals. The emperor has no clothes too often when it comes to knowledge managers, not having a coherent terminology for describing what they do or what their systems are supposed to do or their processes are supposed to do. And another principle is to apply a hypothesis-led agile approach. A little bit about that. What does that mean? In the world of software and startups today, lean startup, it's assumed today that you're going to have to adjust your going-in ideas when they hit up against reality. And you want to create minimally viable products and fail fast by testing them and iterating. With regards to knowledge management and implementing collaborative intelligence approaches to knowledge management, you should also consider that hypothesis-driven approach. I believe that if we were to deploy a wiki for this working group, we would achieve the following outcomes. You can put it to a test. You can even put it to a test without actually building a wiki. There are ways to do it to simulate. And here, there are challenges with regards to process. And we've developed a solution for mapping information flow across organizations. We developed this in the Homeland Security context. I'll briefly give you an idea of what that's like. It applies to other contexts as well. Is there anyone here in the Homeland Security arena? Just one or two? So I'll keep it brief. You present a scenario to people. And I said Homeland Security, it could be cybersecurity, of course. You present a scenario to the group of stakeholders, and as you reveal this scenario, you ask people, how would you find out about this event? Given that you find out, and from whom, right? And by what means of communication. And okay, when you find out about that event that needs to trigger some type of action on your part, what do you need to do? And what are the critical information inputs, or the DoD might say the essential elements of information that you need in order to do that task or make that decision? And where do they come from? And I can go on and on with detail, like how quickly do you need them? By what means of communication? What's the backup? So there's a rich ontology for describing information flow. The bottom line is at the end of this process, you get a map showing the flow of information as people think it should be, and you can compare it to how people describe the way information actually flows. So these are some of the questions that we ask when we engage in such a process. We ask about issues that impact your ability to access or use information. We ask about the information sources, and I touched upon some of these things on the previous slide already. And so understanding people's information needs at scale is not easy. You don't have 100,000 consultants to send around to interview people for an hour. Do the math, that's very expensive. So there are ways that we've developed so that you can, via computer mediation, collect coherent descriptions of people's information needs. And often what people tell you is not actually what they do. So there's a relatively new area in software technology called process mining, which looks at the actual log files, and basically the data doesn't lie. If people say, you know, once a week I have to log on to this portal to access this information, you look at the log files and you see the reality. So mining to discover process reality is an interesting technique that still too few organizations are using. On to data. Not too long on this one. Some of the key principles. If you don't have the ability to describe or name or address the data that you want to manage or you want to access, or the access to which you want to improve, you're not going to get very far. And another principle is involving the business users in the naming or the specification of the terminology you're going to use to describe the data or the metadata. And that's key, because if you hire some consultants and you put them in a room, they will create lots of documentation that will be absolutely meaningless or remote from the reality of the people who are actually doing the work. So the challenges in the data arena that definitely impact the ability to create effective collaborative intelligence are challenges of unlocking the data's potential. You can't unlock the potential of data and use the data effectively unless you can identify it, unless it's cleaned and in a format that enables integration, systematic integration, with wherever that data needs to go in order to be analyzed or used. An interesting experience I had recently with my team was going into a large insurance company, meeting with the data management team, so data management professionals, and after a session or two, realizing they don't actually have a coherent way of describing data management problems. How ironic. They've spent millions of dollars on software and services to do things with data. The business mandate coming down is we need to make data-informed decisions and so on. But they can't actually produce a coherent list of the data management problems in their organization, let alone slice and dice or analyze that list in order to identify those data management issues which are most critical to the business metrics that they're trying to improve. That has to change. So as knowledge management professionals, you're not necessarily data management responsible for data management, but you are working and collaborating with data management, and you need to be part of the process, actively contributing to developing a way to coherently describe the data management issues that your colleagues have. Because if they've got data management issues that matter, chances are good that these are actually the roots of knowledge management issues, right? I can't find the expert on this topic. Why? Because our topics are not named coherently. And I don't actually have a way of discerning an expert from a non-expert. You have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you speak to the fact, though, that in a role in knowledge management, especially in kind of a leadership role, the data issues of some companies are so complex and such a mess that if you start diving into trying to get the data cleaned or whatever one of those things you want to pick out, you can actually get sucked down into the weeds so much that at the end of the year they'll say, well, what did you do? And you can say, I spent the year trying to clean up our data. And they're like, how did that go? And you're like, not so well.
Absolutely. You're entirely correct. I couldn't agree more. You can't allow yourself to go down the data management rabbit hole, but you need to be part of the solution, not a contributor to the problem. You are a contributor. I don't mean to pick on you, but we do contribute to the problem as knowledge managers if we just deploy whatever fill-in-the-blank software, you know, social web 2.0 software, whatever it is, without thinking about the data management implications. So first principle is do no harm, right? Align with the data management efforts that matter. So what can we do to solve these data management related problems that can undermine KM efforts? One of the things that we can do, this may be a little technical, is we can utilize technology for data management that is designed to deal with the problem with the aid of semantic analysis and machine learning, and that accelerates all the entire data management life cycle. And what you essentially want to get is a kind of virtual knowledge graph of all the concepts that matter, that are in the various data sources. And with that virtual knowledge graph, with the semantics between the concepts in that knowledge graph hopefully defined, or at least consistent, you're able to do a lot in order to accelerate the design or execution of software systems of any kind. And the machine learning can come into play, and this kind of loops back to what we said earlier of people helping to make software smart. Is, let's say you have a domain expert who is the one who is saying this term is in this data system over here is equivalent to that term in that data system over there. The machine learning actually, and this is not, the machine learning learns from the positive and negative examples. And so pretty soon the software can suggest these terms are probably the same, what do you think? And it's getting it right more and more of the time. On to technology. Some principles relating to technology would be to leverage the human collaboration to enhance the technology's value. Again, I gave an example in the context of data management and machine learning enhanced semantic data management. Here an example might be in a recommender system context. You want a system to suggest things to your users, and you want those suggestions to be valid. So people can play an important role in providing the basis for those recommendations by creating a labeled training set, or not even just developing a labeled training set as a standalone project, but just committing to thumbs up, thumbs down, star something for enough time so that the software can learn from that. Another principle with regards to technology is to consider the broad context for human-computer interaction. Here, I want to touch upon two challenges, and one is about education. Too many of us, and the employees that we work with, don't really understand the limits of technology. We all have iPhones and Android devices with virtual assistants in our pockets. Some of us use them, some of us don't. We have Alexa, we have Siri, Cortana, we have these different devices. We're talking to our cars, and some of us are wondering, why don't we have this at work? And I'll talk about why that's a challenge. But here the point is that a lack of understanding about what technology can and cannot do undermines your effort to build collaborative intelligence. It creates false expectations that can't be met, unreasonable expectations that can't be met. And unfortunately, some technology companies don't make things any easier for us when their technology is essentially a black box. We've got no idea why it spits out whatever recommendation or finding it spits out, and we'll talk about what a solutions to that might be. So for the education piece, the mismatch of understanding about what technology can do with what it really can do, one solution obviously is to create some basic training about AI. And this is not a computer science course at MIT, but some basics in what AI is about and how it works. Well, I'm going to have a few slides about that in a moment. Another solution is to develop artifacts, so visual diagrams, let's say, that represent information flow holistically. In other words, if you create process diagrams that show how your organization is accomplishing something, to be sure that you have the people and the technology there in the diagram, and not just imagine some fictitious world where it's the software doing the whole thing, or it's just organizational chart blocks doing the work, but to actually have an integrated picture. So I'm not going to turn this into a whole long AI lesson, but I want to make a few points about AI today and where I think increasingly we're headed. Today, AI is often, as I mentioned, a black box, and it doesn't explain itself. And so these are some of the questions that we really don't get answered. And the trend now, which is fairly recent, is towards explainable AI. AI that is capable of helping you understand why it concluded what it concluded, and it'll have interfaces which actually display the rationale. And getting back to the idea of helping people understand how it works, I want to briefly touch upon the notion of knowledge representation. Software, or let's say computer software, cannot reason unless there's a formal representation of the domain that it's expected to deal with. We, as human beings, are capable of dealing with ambiguity very well. And we can infer from what we see around us all sorts of things that a computer cannot unless it has been explicitly represented. And the subdomain of AI that deals with this is called knowledge representation. And there are all sorts of different knowledge representation techniques, one of which is semantic networks, and such as ontologies. And so in this graph, I'm sorry it's a little faint, you have nodes and edges, and these edges or vertices are labeled. So, John lives in this dorm. This is the name of a dorm, and this name of a dorm is an instance of dorm, dormitory. So, unless knowledge is represented in a formal representation language, of which there are many, such as OWL, Web Ontology Language, software can't reason and answer questions for us that require inference. And so expecting a chatbot, for example, to be able to answer a question which depends on knowledge that has not been formally represented is futile. And finally, governance. As knowledge management professionals, you want to use AI, you're using AI. There are a lot of strings attached when it comes to compliance, governance, and security. Copyright restrictions, information privacy, open source software licensing issues are some. Once you start crossing boundaries, you fall into regulations like Global Data Protection Regulation that is coming into force mid this year. And if you're collecting personally identifiable information in any way, shape, or form, or there's a risk of that being exposed through the use of your knowledge systems, you're already in a world of governance and compliance pain. So, I want to close by the presentation part of this by talking about what we do at Mind Alliance, and hopefully it will be informative. So when we meet clients, we focus initially on understanding the client's business objectives. We don't want to hear about anything initially other than what they're trying to achieve as a business or as a nonprofit or as a government agency. And the problems must be diagnosed before they can be solved or before we can prescribe. And so being able to diagnose the problems itself already requires a language or a controlled vocabulary of some sorts sufficient to describe the issues in the organization with enough rigor so that we can put it into an Excel or other tools and slice and dice it and answer some basic questions like, which are the knowledge management problems which are most acute because they impact critical processes or decisions or tasks or roles with the following types of consequences. That syntax, like what are the top knowledge management issues of this type impacting this business unit in the context of this business process that impact this metric. Most knowledge managers can't express that in a data clear way. And if you can't, you end up with very mushy Word documents and PowerPoint slides about the problem you're trying to solve, but you don't have enough focus on what you actually need to resolve. Then we engage in strategic planning to develop an approach to addressing those problems, and then we design the specific solutions that are called for to address those problems. Then if software is required, not all solutions require software, we engage in software development. I have our director of product design here, and afterwards, if you'd like, we'd be happy to tell you about how we design software solutions. It's a very interesting process. And then implementation. Implementation is not just about, here's the software, let's go live, send out an email and invite people. There's a lot that goes on with ensuring success of a rollout of a software solution. How do you know when we are succeeding? How will you know when you're succeeding with the collaborative intelligence approach to knowledge management? You're going to see time savings. You're going to see time savings reflected in where you're spending your time, but also, more importantly, where hopefully hundreds or thousands of your employees are spending their time. Improved outcomes in terms of what the business is trying to achieve. Obviously, that's critical. Better, faster discovery of issues because you're identifying all the influences and impacts of the problems, and large-scale goal achievement. So I hope this was not too much information all at once. I'm happy to continue the conversation with you afterwards. Now let's open it up to questions. Feel free to ask anything you want about knowledge management, the collaborative intelligence approach, or any other aspect of knowledge management, and I'll answer as best as I can. Over there. Do you mind, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask you about something that the previous presenter.
I was just going to say if you could identify yourself when you ask the question. I'm sorry to interrupt. No. We're editing the video. We're editing the video. We're going to rewind that. Clean start. You can ask again whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Now you made it easier for everyone else.
Can you go back a couple slides?
Sure.
One more. There you go.
I'm happy to send you this if you like.
So you know you've gotten the right solution when you have time savings and what was the other part?
Oh, that was on this slide. And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the indicators. If you're not saving time at all, usually there's something wrong with your effort to enhance knowledge management. If there are no time savings anywhere, something usually is not right. Yes?
You were talking about the limitation of the AI capabilities, right? And so to work well and to leverage, the connection between human and AI, there must be some sort of time spent and wasted in discovering what AI can actually do, right? So how do you circumvent that issue?
By learning from other people's mistakes and making sure you pick the right partners who are not going to sell you snake oil. And when I say snake oil, I don't mean that the technology that they're selling doesn't work at all. It works. It'll do something. And it may do that something very well. But they are misrepresenting, consciously or unconsciously, that technology as the solution. Why? Because they've been backed by a VC and they want a hockey stick growth curve and they want something that scales. And sadly, once you involve people in the mix, scalability often goes out the window unless you have the right tools for making it scale. So learn from other organizations' failures to adopt technology like AI, and be sure to look at the process you're trying to improve holistically and not think that the technology alone is going to solve the problem. Most likely it can help, but won't be the complete solution. And you'll need training, you'll need a lot of data cleaning or data improvement in order to make use of the AI. And they won't come and say, oh, by the way, you're going to need to spend $1 million to get your data in order for our software to actually use it, right? Yes?
Very interesting presentation. A lot of things here. My head is sort of spinning. I'm excited. But seeing that we're on this slide, I wanted to ask you if you could share with us an example of a concrete project or projects where you've achieved some of these in the camp context.
Sure. Happy to continue this afterwards and show you live demos. I mean, one of the areas which we are engaged in is building an intelligence platform for the private sector, and it's called MindPeer. And it's not formally launched yet, but I think I'll be able to give you a sense of this. Let's take blockchain as an example. Okay, so we know, I'm on a phone connection, so it may not be very fast. We know that blockchain is a hot topic, and unfortunately what that means is there's too much information about it to filter. And most of us don't have time to read all the news about blockchain that potentially is related to our business. So the combination of human intelligence and artificial intelligence takes form in MindPeer in several ways. I'll just point out one. Here, after retrieving information from 20,000 news sources and analyzing that information with natural language processing and enhanced with deep learning techniques, you end up with some results. But it takes a human being to do that last mile of curation and of enhancement in order to distill it down to what's actionable for a particular decision maker. You have to understand their context. So that's an example, and I'll be happy to go into more detail later if you want. Yes?
Hi, can you give an example of good text analytics software and also good practices of analyzing both structured and unstructured data, meaning like structured data meaning
Sure.
quantitative, unstructured like text?
Yeah. Great question. There are easily 75 good text analytics software systems. And they're better or worse at different things. It depends on what you're trying to do. Some will excel at named entity recognition, in other words, identifying the names of people and companies and locations out of the box because they have a knowledge graph that lists all those things. Others are better at sentiment analysis, positive, negative sentiment in the text than others. Some are not really that great at sentiment analysis. So you have to look at the use case and drive the selection of the text analytics vendor or technology based on the use case. There are very few platforms that do both structured data analysis and unstructured data analysis in the same package. Again, in the world of structured data analysis, I've got a database with hundreds of companies. And again, it depends on whether you want a data analysis solution for a particular use case in a particular vertical. And you've got a company that already has something trained and ready for, and with adapters for, fill in the blank, consumer, let's say website e-commerce data versus, pharmaceutical or life science, genomic data. Again, it really depends on the use case. If you would like afterwards, I'd be happy to understand more about your specific needs, and then if I can point you to the right, potential partners, that'd be great. So I think we're out of time. I hope it was informative, and